So, welcome everybody. This is this is the inaugural meeting of the Seminar on Criminal Justice, Past and Present. So the aim of this CUNY Academy Seminar is to complement some of the fabulous work that's being done over in the sociology department by the folks who meet with Calvin Smiley and some of my senior colleagues there. And the reason we started this, confess, is because I'm a historian. So I was hoping to not just invite people to explore issues around criminal justice, but possibly a few other aspects of criminal justice that don't necessarily get as promoted, things like the history of the prison or the architecture of the prison, things like that. So the idea is to give people an opportunity to sort of explore various aspects of criminal justice from an interdisciplinary perspective. My name is Annalisa Ratai. I'm one of the advisory board members for the CUNY Academy for the Humanities and the Sciences, which is an organization that was founded in the 1980s in tandem with the University Faculty Senate to support faculty across CUNY as they promote their scholarship. We also have a book talk series. The CUNY Academy sponsors awards for untenured and mid-career faculty, as well as travel awards and a variety of conferences. So if something occurs to you and you're curious, please let me know. I think what I'm going to ask you to do is just leave your email before you disappear this evening so that I know who's interested for the next one of these, which is going to happen on February the 25th. Tonight, we're going to discuss a paper by my distinguished colleague, Sergio Grossi of John Jay College of Criminal Justice, entitled Global Community Safety, Analysis of Community Responses to the Harms of Crime and Incarceration through Brazil's Prisons Without Police Model. Dr. Grossi is an assistant professor of criminology in the Department of Sociology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He's an associate researcher at the Sorbonne Institute of Legal and Philosophical Studies. Dr. Grossi's research focuses on an international comparative analysis of best practices in the domains of education and reintegration for incarcerated persons. He's conducted research at various institutions, including Cambridge University, Paris, Nanterre, the Complutense University of Madrid, the University of São Paulo, the Federal Fluminense University at Rio de Janeiro, and the universities of Bologna and Padua. He has been invited to Columbia University and UNESCO as a visiting scholar, and he served on scientific committees and is an expert for the UNESCO Chair to Applied Research for Education in Prison and the United Nations Inter-Regional Crime and Justice Research Institute. And he's also a member of the University Faculty Senate Committee on Higher Education in the Prisons, which is how I had the privilege of getting to know him. To discuss it this evening is Dr. Alex Vitale, a professor of sociology and the coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center. He spent the last 30 years writing about policing and consults community-based movements, human and civil rights organizations, and governments internationally. Dr. Vitale is the author of City of Disorder, How the Quality of Life Campaign Transformed New York Politics and the End of Policing. His academic writings on policing have appeared in Policing and Society, the American Journal of Sociology, Social Research, Criminology, Public Policy, Police Practice and Research, Mobilization, and Contemporary Sociology. He's also appeared, his essays and commentary have appeared in a number of mainstream journals, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Nation. You can pick him up and read so many interesting things that he's written. But tonight, we're going to get to hear from him in person. So please welcome these two wonderful speakers for our first Criminal Justice Center.
Thank you for being there and for organizing also this seminar. I'm very happy to be there, in particular in the day after. Very good news for the people that work with criminal justice overall. when finally we have a candidate that have some proposal that is different from the traditional candidate, and I will speak a little bit on some of the work that I'm going through from a long time, trying to think how we can transform the punishment in our society. And I will go to the next slide, if it's well. Is it moved? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I will start briefly, like that in many people that work inside the prison, many people that work inside the punishment system, they know very well that we have like the idea of education, rehabilitation sometime in the law, and what we happen then inside the prison space many times is like what I call like pedagogy of oppression. That is the services are not there, like the people can get stuck like these kinds of prisons in Brazil, but then there are some of the system that more and more like this Salvador prison system deny absolutely the idea of rehabilitation, education, and then it's like mere punishment, is incapacitation, it's try to scare the people and create this kind of system that we know that violate human rights. At the same time, this person can get consent while the population with this kind of system. Then, based on this, we have one of the founder of the critical criminology in Italy was saying that we have to rethink radically the politics of reintegration and education inside the prison, and then for this, otherwise, is the problem is that the punitive system can advance. Based on this, I was studying like in one of the worst prison system worldwide in Brazil that is extremely punitive. One alternative to prison that was born in the 70s. In the 70s, there was a big problem of overcrowding, structural violence inside the prison and outside, with the policing like killing the people outside, and also there was the dictatorship. Very few rehabilitative opportunities inside the prison. Was very common the lack of respect of human rights, the neglect of prison population that was forgotten inside this prison space, and the staff abuse. As always, in the 70s, and still until nowadays, the marginalized community are the most affected by the prison system, and there was inside this prison space a class and racialized population. In this kind of space, I was searching like some innovation that take place in the periphery, and then the space that normally we forgot, we don't analyze for searching solution, but like for pointing problem. And then inside this space in the 70s, different group of voluntary that was working with the people in prison, they was trying to transform the prison system from the inside. It was so hard to move something inside the prison system. In the 70s, they have founded an association with people that was working with the Catholic ministry in this time, and then they have the possibility of creating an alternative space when a riot destroyed totally the prison inside one of the near São Paulo city. And the correctional, the prison administration have not the possibility of hosting the people in prison in other facility, and then decided to give the possibility of the voluntary and the people that was with good connection with the people in prison, a house to create another system. Then they started to co-live with the people in prison, the people that was doing good work and have good relation. And then starting for this experience, there was last 1 year, they was showing that with the good relation and the good treat, there was no violence, and the people was accomplished with the education, with the work, and there was not needing then correctional officer and people that are tough on crime and control all the time what they are doing. Based on this, the state tried to come back and take the control of this facility, but they showed that they was fine with the community outside and with the people inside, and then this experience grew and spread around Brazil and then around the world. They have like very very strong point. They say that each person deserve re-education. They deserve education. They can change, independent of the disciplinary history inside the prison or the crime that they have committed before, and that they have to create like solidarity between the people that work inside this unity, the family, the community outside. Then they try to reject the punitive logic of the base of the prison system. They call it prison without police. There are no police, there are no guards, no weapon inside or outside also. They create the shared responsibility for governance. They hire people with lived experience, former prisoner, to work inside the facility and also to coordinate the space. Then they co-work with the people inside the space and outside. And they do what they call the pedagogy of the presence. They want to show that if you give like a possibility, if you give job, if you give like housing and so on, to the people, they can stop to commit crime, and then you can make a safe society, not with more punishment, but more inclusion. Then they work with education on the people in prison, but they work on the education of the community near this APAC unit. There are like a collective governance. They have like a meeting when the people in prison can discuss all the things that they have with problematic with the people that work. And they have also the cave that is of the unity, that is some symbolic space that the point the possibility of like co-sharing the responsibility with these kinds of council of sincerity and solidarity that try to manage all the problem before they can transform themselves in violence. They involve when the state is not working, when the state not furnished like doctor, like psychologist, lawyer. They try to mobilize the community. At the same time, they do advocacy for trying to change the state, but when the state will not move, they call the people that are more connected with the human rights, in the movement of supporting human rights of the people in prison. This space is very, very transparent with respect to the prison system that overall we can see around the world. The researchers are very encouraged, they are open. When I was asking to do the research, they invite me to sleep inside, eat inside. There was no problem with the laptop, with the phone and so on. And also they are like very open to the society near of the prison space for like creating like the connection, rehumanization of the people in prison that many times the institution take off. It's an experience that was starting as a little project and then it become like more popular. And now there are more than 100 units, more than 48,000 people was passing by this experience that become big. They become a public policy and then they start to hire person to work there. And it become like one of the alternative study to the Brazilian government and they spread around. We have this year the possibility of speaking about this experience in the Italian parliament, and some people are already implementing this in Italy. And other things that is very interesting that is a global South model that spread in other global South country and also in the global North country. Then this means that there are a lot of production of alternative in the periphery that we have to study more, and they get like international recognition and expansion starting from the periphery. At the same time, they show also to reducing recidivism and get to reduce the cost of the prison system. That is one of the problems that the prison administration in Brazil face. And these are one of the photos that I take with the garden, with the space that they try to open at the community. As I said, they show low recidivism, reduced cost, and established experience. They got also an award as a social enterprise, and they still spread around the world. These are the different photos that I've taken, the photos with the things that they sell to the society. They try to open maximum possible the space. They are like space for intimate visit that include the sexual relation with people of the LGBT community also is stated inside the main statute of this. There are like library, the education, We can see the art education, and then they can use like internet with the university in prison program that can connect with internet, but also like professionalization in education, and then they can participate in conference. So this is one of the person. There was one of the people that was involved in crime, and then is one of the representative worldwide. Normally, people with lived experience go and found new experience and then create new community, also in other countries. The workspace, we can see that there are many of things that will be not allowed in the classic prison space because for the fear of the violence inside the space, and they create this space where the continued dialogue with the people can avoid the explosion of like violent conflict. There are not ropes that stigmatize the people, and only the visitor have like a cartel that explain that they are like visiting. And then the security, we can see like this is what they call like social educator, or like and then the other are the voluntary people, and they try to open to the community maximum possible to create like a dynamic security based on the safety and the shared trust among the community. There are the participation of the community from the start. They involve the institution. There are like the active participation of the people in prison, and the what we call a center of social reintegration. And then they mobilize, as I say, additional assistance when they cannot get to the state, but at the same time they try to struggle with the state to get more support for their integration space. What they do is an education of the community. They use this kind, they organize a lot of conference, they use this kind of like slogan, like switch from the certain of punishment to the certain of reintegration and education. They point that this make like society more safe. No one is irrecoverable. Many people that was leading riot inside the prison space, they become here like a person that lead this movement. And there was like 40% when one unit that I visit out of 200 that was studying the university. One of the person, for example, was writing to me and was dreaming to do a PhD on Gramsci study, starting from the prison in Brazil. Then it's very far away from the imaginary that we can see normally. There are informal education empowerment for all with the pedagogy of presence. There are co-management of the space, the reduction of the big clash that we see in the prison space with the correctional officer and the people in prison, and the activity of the whole day. The space are open 7 to 10, and the people can do different activity, inclusive like dance and other activity like artistic activity. The unit have to be maximum 200 people, not so big as we can see, because the conflict can escalate quickly if they're more big than this. And also it's interesting for people that have committed rape, like pedophilia, are inside the unity. They have to stay there, and all the people have to learn how to destigmatize the people independent of the crime that they have committed. In the education of the society, we can see that, for example, there are some of this unity was inside like very rich neighborhood that can oppose force if there was like a classic prison, but they try to educate the society, and then they start the dialogue with the people about this possibility of reintegration. And then this open, there was school visiting, there was judge, politician, and technician and citizen. And the people go out also and speak in the school. They make visible the work that they are doing in the other side on the invisibility that the prison won't take themselves normally in our society. In the analysis, I said that we switch more to total institution to social institution. Some people don't want to come back because they was creating like some sort of supportive community inside. They was feeling more harsh the society outside. There was more respect for the human rights, and the people was treated well, respect the prison and also the family. It was not crowded, and there was not reported physical violence and torture, also if they ran for many years. The people was believing the possibility of reintegration, and was an opportunity for socially excluded people. Some people have finished the degree, some people have studied and get job, and the reduction of stigma continues with the people that start to meet the person inside this space with the lower recidivism another time. There was some problematic that the similarity with the total institution for building these kinds of community, there are a lot of rule and for putting the people together. And some scholars will say that there are the creation of docile body, the pointing to the to create like people that can work but are not dangerous politically. We have to say that inside the unit, some of the unity was managed by former prisoner, leader of like in this case the worker party, that was inside the prison during the dictatorship, and many of the professors were really critical professors, very well connected with social movement in Brazil. That is not necessarily true. And the stigma was still present in some APAC, in particular the new building, and there was the new APAC, and there was problem in accessing the labor market. If the society outside has become very competitive, there are like economic crisis, you can support the people, but it will be complicated. And some people was facing harsh time when I was doing the study. Other point that we have to think about is like the possibility that the prison system can be net wide. That can be used for extending the social control and not as alternative. There was these kinds of conflict with the judiciary system and the people that lead APAC. APAC they will not do this, but some of the people in the judiciary system want to create this kind of unity and start more people in the normal prison. Then we have to pay attention on this. And then other people want to put directly people that was otherwise fine inside this unity. Then we have to pay attention that it's not used as alternative to freedom. And other point is that if the people break the rule as the alternative, they come back to the prison, and that this is very problematic because basically the people are like under the control of this penal system that is like a permanent potentiality. Basically on this, we see that we see like that there are like a community response that is very effective, is interesting, building like in very harsh communities, not Norway there, it's very far away, and they still have created this community with the level of violence that of sure some of us and see the last intervention in Rio de Janeiro with the big conflict that killed more than 100 persons when the police enter inside the favela with tanks. Then they work inside this very, very violent prison and penal system and police system. And it's interesting that sometimes there are the connection of global south country. They don't publish in English many times. They pass by other countries like inspiring using like Portuguese or Spanish and creating an alternative without passing from the mainstream language. Many of these alternatives show that is possible also starting from periphery and very harsh conditions create alternative, and there are many that maybe we don't know because they still like understudied around the world. And we see that they try to communitarize, to turn a more communitarian and take back in the society the prison space and open to the society, creating like a different form of management, involving the people in prison and also when they're re-entry back in the society. They try to transform the material condition of the space and also the symbolic condition. We see that this is like a laboratory in where they blur the line between prison and community, and they try to take collective responsibility and share governance inside this space and outside. They try to mitigate the harm of imprisonment and reshape interpersonal dynamic, and with all the time with the direct involvement of people with lived experience. They don't treat like the people in prison as a passive subject, but leader of the transformation of the penal system, in this case in Brazil. And we see in the photo that the environment is very different. They try to all the time to put the effort on the care and not on the punishment. And they try also to use, like, many of the people was using the pedagogy of the oppressed, and they try to build movement. During the COVID, they do a long march to every prisoner in Brazil, and like taking solidarity of the people in prison and between the APAC. Then they build a movement. It's a movement where there are some people with the abolitionist idea, not all the people are there, but they're like to some extent they still going through, and they create like this space for the people, like permit that to reflect on themselves and the society outside. They focus a lot on penal transformation, but also for doing this, then they focus on social justice and social transformation, because if the people, they understand very well that the people need job, need housing when they come back, and then they try to support these kinds of reform. The unity, they create like some sort of APACian person that is like some militant, some like people that want to transform the penal system, like spreading these kinds of model. And also like many of these people start to create like a space for hope, like collective hope, where the people are seeing the change that they are already doing. And yeah, I think that other important things is that they reject the possession of weapons, uniform. They try to take off the military police that is so common in the Brazilian system, and sort of like civilize back the punishment space. Yeah, I think that we can have time for. Yeah, so it's long conclusion. Yeah, I think we can finish with this. That I think that is one of the quote that I was thinking when I was writing this part, that is Calvino, that in the Invisible Side they say that the inferno of the living is not something that will be. If there is one, is what they are. Ready there, the inferno will live every day. That we form being together. There are two ways to escape in suffering. The first is easy for many, accept the inferno and become such part of that you can no longer see it, and many person do this with the contemporary penal system. And the second is risky and demanding constant vigilance and apprehension. Seek and learn to recognize who and what in the middle of the inferno, not inferno, then make them endure and give them space. And in some extent, we see that the APAC, in very harsh situation, they still continue to fight and try to create another space of privation of liberty in the contradiction of like a very violent society. Okay, here we go. Then
I guess I'll stand up here so they can see me. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for inviting me. So I love reading case studies like this, and we'll talk a little bit about how to think about, this kind of a case study. Some of you know that I was discussing on David Garland's new book, Law and Order Leviathan, last week. And Garland takes a very different approach to these questions. He mobilizes basically a Durkheimian worldview that imagines, sociology as this unified, holistic thing filled with institutions that can become out of balance, and that institutions of law backed up by punishment are what holds that social whole together. And as a result, in the book, he argues for the need to maintain robust systems of punishment, that they should, look more like prisons in Norway and less like prisons in Alabama, for those maybe who've seen the new Netflix documentary or otherwise familiar with the horrors down there. But in the discussion, he basically said, the problem with American policing is that we don't spend enough money on it. that we need to radically invest in our punishment infrastructure, because that's how we'll make it more professional, more humane, and less kind of abusive. But Sergio suggests a completely different approach that does not accept that Durkheimian worldview or the unquestioned need for punishment as a solution to whatever social problems we have. He mobilizes some ideas around, the pedagogy of the oppressed, and but mostly you mobilize empirical information about either this particular program or some related types of programs. But I would say that you don't make explicit what the kind of theoretical perspective is that brings you to ask your questions, to structure your case study in a very different way, that does not accept the kind of legal formalism and unquestioned acceptance of the primacy of punishment that we see with Garland and a lot of mainstream criminologists. And I think a more explicit theoretical framework might help you resolve the kind of unanswered question that comes throughout much of the paper, which is, how do we decide what is a reformist reform and what is a non-reformist reform? Is the creation of an obviously more humane, less harmful system actually better overall, or does it potentially legitimate and reproduce the legitimacy of systems of control, incapacitation, excuse me, and incarceration? So, sorry. So let's take a little bit of a step back with the case study. So how do we decide, whether or not something works? Interestingly, the period where this experiment emerges is the same period where Martinson in the US writes the Nothing Works book that reviews all the available studies about positive prison interventions and concludes that they don't actually, in the long run, produce lower crime rates, lower recidivism rates, better prisons, etc. And so that ushers in a wave of sort of carceral pessimism that I argue Garland is a part of, that says, well, all we can do is, punishment and incapacitation, that rehabilitation is a lost cause. So how do we assess this? So Sergio suggests, well, we have some data from this program that gives us lower recidivism rates, lower violence rates while in the program, fewer escapes, fewer riots. These all seem like very relevant metrics for thinking about this. But does that mean that we can draw universal conclusions about a program in Brazil that would apply to the United States or other places in the global north or global south, frankly? So how do we talk about the validity of such findings and the usefulness of a case study for determining policy in other places. I think this has to be a live issue. You, of course, point out the sort of the normal colonial relationship in which often neoliberal models developed in the North get exported to the South. And Marisol LeBron's excellent book on Puerto Rico gives us a really great example of that, where they bring these ideas from the mainland down to Puerto Rico to really wreak havoc on low-income and especially Black Puerto Rican communities. So we don't want to reproduce the logics of universalizing language, which have historically been the tool of colonial processes. And how do we know, even if we accept the metrics that Sergio has laid out, which look very good, I will just say this looks very good. How do we determine what aspects of the program are producing the desired outcome? Mm-hmm. So Sergio does give us a nice listing of potential like mechanisms of causation that do lay out the potential aspects of the program, and he gives us some background on them. Though there is a little bit of a question of temporality, because this program has been around a long time and the evaluation research has occurred at different points in time. Is the program evaluated in 2017 really the same program that was happening in 1979? Because of course programs evolve over time, if nothing else because of changing circumstances, but also presumably they're learning. So we have to think about how we talk about this mobilization of mechanisms of causation, and again, be cautious of making universalistic claims about something that is contingent, that is changing over time, etc. So I typically approach these case studies as, material for consideration, for inspiration, for experimentation, without trying to lean into the kind of positivistic claims of universality that have, I think, badly muddied our understanding of a lot of criminological dynamics, where one or two randomized controlled trial experiments that are funded by elite institutions and carried out by a very small number of elite scholars with institutional connections to the places they're studying, then becomes the gold standard of truth that is produced in this universal way. I was at ASC last year, I think it was, maybe the year before, criminology, and Thomas Apt, with the support of the Arnold Ventures Foundation, is saying, well, we got approval to do a meta-analysis of all the studies of like violence interruption programs so that we will know definitively if it works, why it works. And much to my pleasure and surprise, David Kennedy, who I was sitting next to, we both like raised our hands and pointed out that this is ridiculous, that these programs have been around for decades, but most of them are very new, are constantly innovating, and we have no idea what's going on in a lot of these programs. And certainly a handful of studies from 25 years ago are not going to tell us anything definitive about whether or not these programs that are operating today actually work. I had just a couple of questions related to these mechanisms of causation. Our colleague David Brotherton has been working with Credible Messenger program, a Credible Messenger program inside the DC jail system. And I work with such programs in communities. And I'm wondering whether or not there's anything from that approach that either is occurring but wasn't labeled in that way, or they're doing something that maybe the Credible Messenger approach could learn from in terms of the humanizing treatment of people, etc. Let me just make sure I got those. Okay, so now, reformist reforms or not. Critical resistance, other groups have tried to lay out some guidelines for thinking about this, but in the breach, it's not always so straightforward. How far do we step back? Any incremental reform, and all reforms are, all changes are going to be incremental, always run some risk, right, of legitimating the state of affairs. If Brazil is a deeply unequal capitalist society, and crime and disorder is an expression of that, and if we manage through intensive, humane interventions to take the edge off of some of that crime and disorder, is that just a re-legitimation of capitalism? When really we should, so we have to be careful. There is no perfect here, but I think this is where maybe a more explicit or stronger theoretical framework might at least help us to tease this out a little bit better. If we're not involved in this kind of mythical liberal legal formalism, is this historical? Do we need a historical materialist analysis that helps us understand how a program like this fits into larger logics of economic exploitation? Do we need a feminist epistemology that helps us see the ways these systems work from the eyes of the participants, the community, how it affects family dynamics, things like this? Do we need some queer theory to help us break down some of the taken for granted binaries of criminal, offender, guilty, innocent, imprisoned, free, that too often, I think, mislead us about the nature of these institutions? Finally, these are some of the theoretical perspectives that I bring to the work that I do. And this has led me to draw some conclusions strategically about programs like this, which is that my preference is to go upstream, to act before we involve the criminal legal system, the prison system. This is a big strategic debate. There are a lot of people whose academic, political, intellectual focus is on prisons are bad. How do we help prisoners? How do we reintegrate prisoners? And we have seen, billions of dollars spent in the US on reentry programs that just don't really work. And we see the prisons continue to get worse. We've had some reduction in prison populations in some states, but other states, the numbers are still going up. And the logic of imprisonment remains perfectly well intact. And I instead feel that we should be focused in our, in our spending of political capital on working with young people in crisis, doing community-based work, building political power at the neighborhood level, rather than trying to save prisoners, which sometimes there is a kind of missionary-like quality to some of this work. So again, thank you, Sergio, for this really interesting paper that you can see really stimulated me to think about a lot and for inviting me to be the discussant. Anyway, you want us to sit up here together? You want to sit up here and I'll throw fruit at you from the back of the room?
Yeah, something
Maybe I'll turn the computer a little bit so
yeah.
that they can sort of see us.
Yeah. Maybe. But then there's office. Yeah.
There's.
There, yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's like thank you for like your analysis and then this is like I will start with with this paper. This paper is like a draft. Then for like a book that will come in the next year. There are like Fergus McNeil and other people that work on resistance, like probation, parole, and it will be like rethinking like alternative worldwide. And then in this is like a very short version of like a book that I will publish about this experience, and then many of the things they cannot stop like in the little paper. Then they are already have written about this discussion about education and abolitionism already, and then I have other things that will be in the book. Then some things was like the space that was very hard to stuff. All the things there. It's very similar. This speaking with Dave and see like the credible messenger. There are like some ground similarity on what the people were doing to some extent. And you see like the pedagogy of the oppressive is like some theoretical framework that start with the class analysis. Class analysis and then like the pedagogy of oppression is built unity between the people and then try to transform the penal institution of the society that is coming back in some extent. Then there are like these and they build the movement. Then where the movement then as the same Marx was saying, the movement will decide which kind of things they want to, where they want to go, what they want to criticize. And what was interesting was like the people inside this space that the time for thinking on abolitionism, for thinking on like a critical reform or like more radical. And the people was connected, like one of the leaders was one senator of the working party in Brazil, and they was doing internal struggle inside the working party because some people don't care at all of the implementation. Like they have in some extent they have these kinds of positionality. They try to be neutral in some extent with the institution for the fear of being clashed, as many reentry programs, many like programs that get like funds from the state or need the support of the state. Then they try to do this. But then, for example, in the second round of Bolsonaro, they have like take a shift and position like clearly against Bolsonaro government election. And the people, the institution move them like also risking to lose fund to be clashed with all the time if you have not. One of the leaders of the working party will say to me, yeah, I would like that all the people have job and all the people have housing. I cannot do this inside the party. The party will not agree what I can do. I will start with the people in prison and we construct with the people in the community that can do this, with the people that's there. And then this is one of the points where the people like work in a harsh condition with stigmatization, with the idea that nothing works. It's still there. But then connecting with the nothing works, we know that already in this analysis, there was some program that was showing that there was some work. But the prison system is criminology. It's very complicated. If you put some program in a system that is built for like failing people, for like create like punish people, it's so hard to create like some space for the transformation of the people. In a like more recent study, there are people work on the resistance and like try to theorize and put in place like work that try to take off the people to crime, but also what interesting me is more that they have like to get conscious and organization because like the people themselves that are more affected from the incarceration have to decide which kind of path they want to build for stopping this that we know and we criticize, you know that is failing or repeating themselves like so harsh. It go through that. What they will see that in some extent the people was have space for reflecting and for building connection. And it's not only I study other programs, but for example, like at the university in prison in Buenos Aires, they have created trade union inside the prison. They have created cooperative of workers that give work and all of the people that come there.
Sergio, if I could, you're sort of describing the theoretical framework of the program organizers,
Yeah.
but that's different than the epistemological framework that you are bringing
Yeah.
to the organization of the case study and the kinds of questions you're asking.
Yeah. It's like this is another question. It's like there is the analysis of the organization and
Yeah.
But I select this organization exactly because I was starting to study like a long time ago other total institution, and in this case the asylum system, and they were studying the Basaglia movement, the criticized of the another total institution in this case. And I was trying to understand how we can overcome the problem that we see. And then I studied offshore, there was Foucault, there was Marx, and then there was Basaglia, was one of the people that theorized and practice like a super, like taking over like the system. And we have like in the 70s, we get the national law, that we get the consensus for the people vote to abolish all the asylum system. They get like the criminal asylum system still was still working until 8 years ago. It was the last part to them when the people was mandatory inside the system. This movement was criticized in the same time the prison, but the prison was more harsh to like overcome, and then there was like this was one of the bases of the start of my research about the prison, why I selected to some extent this case study on this like very complicated issue. Sure, on generalizability, I don't think that will be like it was not this main objective. It was like some sort of like seeing what the people are doing and trying to transform, and at the same time take inspiration. I don't think that I don't think also that the experience here can be generalized as many times we do. Then I totally agree on this. And but yes, I think that if the people have created a fight and created another institution in very harsh condition, it's a lot more easy to take this around and not in Norway when the social condition overall. And we have not maybe the political possibility of doing what they are doing now. Also that, sure, it's important that we still continue. And for me, the reformist means that you build the program but you still continue on the condition that create and push the people to crime. And this is why I was surprised to see the people like with the Freya shirt, speaking the other people on social justice, connecting the prison slavery inside the prison as it was former prison teaching. And then this is like was growing the conflict of the, and then like it's run for a long time, but as a credible message, I don't know how many times it was run, but it's take a long time for creating like a consciousness and build movement. They have do like a lot of work on this in a super punitive system. When Bolsonaro win, saying that a good criminal was that criminal. It's like very punitive, and they have grassroots building with the community around defending the APAC system also against Bolsonaro. Then I think they have to do like a very interesting job on this, and on this like is a movement. Then inside the movement there are like reformists and there are like abolitionists. Then this was when I was studying. I said like it's possible to build a coalition where the people like cohabit inside this, but there are like divergent. You not some people that point on the transformation of society, and then this was the study like that I think that they built coalition that tried to transform the penal system, and then finally there are contradictions inside the movement. As I say in many more editings that I can see like here in the various people that work on re-entry and education inclusion and so on. There are like these kinds of contradictions there all the time. Yeah, things that this is most of the things that I was thinking for when when I was thinking, the recidivism, yeah, it's very complicated. Recidivism, I write about this. Also, there are more like a structural complication because the people inside the APAC, they have not committed violence. They want to participate.
No, I meant to ask you that.
And
So,
then you will be very young if the people are violent to create these kinds of space. And then these people come back to the prison. Then it's not the same population. Many people. Other point is that drugs use. If the people use drugs, they can't stay there.
yeah.
Like, and then they come back. Then it's a problem.
Right, so potential like creaming.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
like structural. Yeah, search and the research, like the research of the cities, I have not been very costly. These kinds of research. They have and methodological complicated. Many problems are the same problem.
Yeah.
It's the same identical problem. I see also with some of the university prisons. The university prison population is different from like the common population that sometimes at like lower level. And so many studies are affected on this kind of like problematic methodological integration on recidivism. Yeah, I think that
All right, so should we hear from some others?
Yeah.
Gee,
Thank you, Sergio. It's very interesting. I think, like you were saying, so often we're told about the global south, it's policy, it's about it being inhumane, it's being bad, like the picture of Salvador. The question I've got two sort of question comments. The first one I'm interested in is public opinion. How is this seen? Given it's been going for so long and changing political context, does it seem like being soft on crime rather than being tough on crime? And how does that affect how it's received? The other comment I have is around stigma. You mentioned stigma a few times. But isn't the stigma really associated with that they have a criminal record and that they're seen as in need of incarceration? So I'm not really quite sure how you can really improve on that.
Okay, then like the public opinion, they are not like research that check what the public opinion in general we see on the app. But the people that stay there, like in the context that was relating this, but also sure, the people that go to the app maybe are people that as the people that work as voluntary in the prison system are already like some sort of like a little bit far away from the general stereotype of the bad people. So then this is what I was seeing and was the analysis was pointing these kinds of like seeing this stigmatization on the idea that the people are violent, that they criminal for in all the part of their life. In some extent, it's like an experience that the people that do the first enter in the prison, and have some extent when they enter and thinks that the people are aggressive, the stereotype of crime. And this is like lower and convince many people to come there and to work and so on. And there was also like they show the trust, like there was opening for like when I was doing the research, it was like a German girl that also was sleeping inside the medication. And then show like that they like they don't they think that it's very safe and that they don't enforce the time the years dangerous. And then this is one of the soft on crime. Yes, there are some people that think that this can be like too soft. But also there are some people that was asking me, how can I work inside? I say, sorry, it's a prison, like, but it's like, and this is what we have to think, because when you think like, in a space like this, in Brazil, there are people that live without home, or like in the favela, without job, sometimes without food. And then in this sense, for some people, like this experience in the world that's very complicated, the belief can be like positive respect of the starting point. And then this was what some people were saying to me, that is one of the things that we have to think about. They work a lot with the community and they think that they are very innovative on this. They do normally seminar with and the book, one of the main books that they spread the idea, the name is We Kill Criminal. Then they don't do human rights of people in prison, but they like put like we kill criminal and like they do the conference like this, and then like defending that penalty, and then they want to speak with the people that defend that penalty. And then starting from there, they do very Freudian work on like reconstruction. Then they go through they do like they try to pick all the people that don't agree with happen and speak with the people. And they do a lot of these kinds of like event and meeting, and they get like force of community finally. Then that is mixed also with the if the religious the human rights perspective we don't take on, then they try to mobilize like more Christian, like rehabilitation ideal, like and so on. That they try to run in their community and build like some political space on the idea that they have. At the same time, like Christian, with the Christian, you can mobilize like punishment, but you can mobilize as a redemption, and they do like this. It's like, and I think that this is very interesting for the colonial point of view, because like some in some space, not necessarily the human rights discourse will mobilize community, and they use. Freire was doing this when he was working with the alphabetization of like farmer. They was using a lot of the church connection for like bringing the people to social justice. One of the leaders is inside the theology of liberation, that is like they mobilize like Catholicism and creating like with the social justice perspective.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your talk, for the paper, for this work. I have a lot of thoughts, so I'll try to keep it brief, but I mean, I think in short, it's an incredibly just informative model, and one that I think would benefit from probably being piloted, you know, in more contexts. I guess what was really interesting for me, and I think it goes to the point about sort of the theoretical framework or sort of the origin story. The origin story to me, I think, was interesting as I work in the juvenile detention centers here in New York City, so Crossroads and Horizons. And the thing that kept sticking out to me was sort of the material conditions that sort of necessitated the riots in 1972, right, which sort of coincides with what was going on in the US at that time, Attica, and sort of the structural conditioning of overcrowding. The fact that at that time, as you laid it out really well in your presentation, there was the context of overcrowding and structural violence, and the conditions of the prison had worsened to the point where essentially prisoners took over the prison, right? And we've seen this in different contexts throughout the world. You see this in Venezuela happening now as well. As the prisons become overcrowded, the material condition becomes such that the state can no longer really police the prisons. I mean, I'm sort of oversimplifying, but just to get to the point of where I think there's a real interesting point for me in my work here in New York City and just in the US. Currently, if you go to Crossroads, you can't even give proper educational programming. I know because I offer BMCC courses there through CUNY Central K16. It's so overcrowded that they have travelers, residents who are sleeping in classrooms, on floors, on desks. Maybe this is not a surprise to anybody, but for me, it's still shocking to see that as an outside volunteer, right? I don't work for ACS, I don't work within the facility, and they don't even really try to clean this up. Mind you, you also have the state go in, you know, public advocate, the sort of, you know, the sort of authorities that are supposed to sort of regulate, right? So there's audits that come out, there's, you know, damning reports of the sexual abuse and violence that's happening inside Crossroads or inside Horizons or at Rikers Island or at jails and prisons throughout the country.
We had a big demo at Horizons 2 weeks ago with young people up in Bronx.
And so for me, I guess the point that I'm trying to make or get to is that I think trying to design a similar approach is one not only necessary, but I think at this point, it's the only possible outcome because this is just not a sustainable process. And for abolition to come sort of externally, this idea that the public will put pressure on the prison, I think is sort of troubled by this idea that actually from inside is the most tension and conflict, and the crumbling is happening actually from within. It happens with corrections officers, you know, no longer wanting to do their job, or they just are understaffed, or, you know, people are quitting their job or not signing up, so then they have to lower the age. And so there's this sort of way that the system is breaking already. So I think in that sort of vein, trying to understand the relationship between what happened in Brazil in the 70s and kind of understanding the historical lens, which, you know, is of course the sort of ethos of this seminar, but connecting that to right now in the 2020s, right? And what's going on here. And I guess the last point to connect that all is what you mentioned, Professor Vitale, about the programmatic sort of approach. So which part of the programming is most effective, and the sort of, not the RCT model, but definitely like a causal, you know, way of understanding this. Not to say that that's the only way, but it is certainly a language that's spoken. And I know that research on, for example, CMS in New York City, City Council has done research on this, and they found broadly, generally the studies have shown that, you know, there's a correlation between reduction in shootings, crisis management, you know, cure violence, not necessarily in the facilities, but more on sort of the preventative on the outside approach, but similarly. So I guess my question from that is, one, sort of, what do you think of the structural condition of the prison itself, and how different it is what you showed in Sico in El Salvador, and that sort of system that is beyond just a Nordic system, but it's really like a living community. I mean, at least from the images we're able to see in the descriptions. And then how we might try to better understand the programmatic aspects of what is working. Is it the educational aspect? Is it the rehabilitation aspect? Is it different in different places? It's very hard to empirically quantify or whatever, something that's clearly so much more nuanced and complex and part of our human phenomenon. And then sort of what lessons might we learn, you know, I guess selfishly thinking from, you know, this sort of New York City standpoint, what might we learn for our, you know, sort of conditions here, if that makes sense, if you speak to that.
Yeah, the structural condition, to some extent, like very harsh, as I was saying, I was not speaking a lot, but you know, like there are like near 1 million people inside the prison. Many of the people are from favela, from poor neighborhood, are for this and that. And like big of the number of these people are inside also for like drugs related offense. And we have like absolutely like I would say like many of these people have not to be there absolutely already, like because like, you know, there comes like some people get in jail in Brazil. It was interesting because in the Brazilian government do like technically a reform for depenalizing the drug consumption in the 2000. And what was happened is that exploded the mass incarceration. Then because the decriminalization of the use of drugs, when they put like the judiciary system that most of like white rich people and like male and Catholic to want to punish the people, you know, and then they have not anymore the law on punish as a consumer, then they start to charge the people as like trafficker, like organized crime. This was not the government have like but it's not the government was supposed to through reforming the law like this, and this is like this is why it's so hard to understand when the reform is not reformist, because in this case it was many people on the abolitionist mode pushing this, but then the backlash of like maintaining the same judiciary system was like totally, you see like the spark of the mass incarceration, because then the people get charged with 10 years. Then it's like we have absolutely to think about this, and I think that what the APAC was doing, it was like creating like some sort of like safe space that the people themselves can build this kinds of knowledge, can lead the movement, can speak out, can go to university, and this is a big problem that we see that normally it's like other people that speak for the people, you know, and then they are like in some extent they learn, they think, they start to they do movement and you know they reflect and they do error and so on. And this is what I think is that we can learn, and maybe like they are already there like with the university impression program here. Also, like my feeling is I'm starting to do, you know, some reflection about this I'm almost new. I don't feel that I not necessarily find like some like critical like explicit critical reflection that the people in prison have like that going necessarily beyond like need education and work and a better place in the society. That is already very good, because we have I would say that it's very good because the people are very complicated in the last part of the society, and then also improving the life of the people that get a job is a super job inside the condition that we have nowadays. But it's still not necessarily build the consciousness that it's not only about the individual job, but some more like collective transformation, you know. But to some extent, they like, you know, the re-entry program that the university have built and give out to some extent. And not like the massive housing of like more than 1 million people that America will meet, but still, like that, I think that there are movement, there are people reflecting, not necessarily they are like maybe like well organizing for creating, because then this is the big problem. When you pass to ask for public policy, you have to have like, you know, a class unity, I would say, like you have to have like group of people that can fight for this, and they have like the resource of fight and the time and the will, and this is like it's not easy like there are like many steps for building this kind of coalition, and I think that all this program can serve in some extent. I totally agree that it will be better also like to work the child care, to work before then the people go to crime. Like many things in Europe simply don't happen already, you know, because we have such a state. But then it's like I will agree, but there are not all the time like politically possible. This if the society don't agree. Then you have to. I think that you have to move and create like a transformation with the possibility that you have and ask more. It's not stop, not being like say like it's okay situation. But I think that you can work absolutely before, but also you can work in the rehabilitation, you can work in the re-entry. We have a lot of work to do, and in some extent is what I was seeing like some like public opinion research here in America that the people can support like strongly punishment, but they can support also rehabilitation and re-entry program. Then like if we have, I think the political intellect, and theoretically, where we have space to work, to act, we can do this. And then all the time, like still like reflecting critically, that is not the final solution. It's one like incremental space that we open. Now I'm thinking on Gramsci, like with the long march of the institution, you know, like, where you have like space to move, try to move it and to open, and then but still continue critical to build movement. This is what yeah.
I was going to respond to your question, but I will just start by responding to that, which is in practice, people who work on prisons don't work on community stuff.
Right.
Period. There is no looking for where the opportunities are. They've made a decision they're going to save prisoners, and that's what they do. And even when there's like no possibility of accomplishing anything, they will just continue to do that endlessly. So what I would like to see is some actual hard strategic conversations about where are we putting our limited political capital. And I think when we look at horizons, it's to get people out of there and into something better.
Yeah.
And this, you mentioned the drug decriminalization. So, and that it was supported by abolitionists, but I think that is a thin analysis of abolitionists, because decriminalization without some level of community transformation will generate a political backlash or will be repurposed by the state. So where were the community public health initiatives? Where were the harm reduction services? Where were the targeted economic development strategies that were needed to actually resolve the real problems that drugs use and dealing can produce in communities? In the absence of that, if we just leave people on the street, then the community backlash will just mobilize. So kids shouldn't be in horizons, but they need to be somewhere. So what are we doing, not to build a better horizons, but what are we doing to build out the CMS system, the Atlas system, the family support systems that aren't generalized poverty reduction, I object to that.
Yeah.
Because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about very specific targeted interventions that do not cost tens of billions or trillions of dollars.
Right.
We have this false thing about, well, we can't possibly do anything about poverty, so the only option that's left is policing and incarceration.
Mhm.
No, we got a lot of evidence that there's a limited number of young people in high levels of crisis, and we have some really good ideas about what to do about that, and that's where we should put our political energies. I think you waited patiently.
It's kind of, I might have a more pessimistic take than yours, just on terms of the system kind of crumbling on its own. But I was really interested in your question about the origins of it and the kind of, I mean, if we're having, I want to thank you for putting this out there, because I think having this in English and having it kind of as as a post for expanding the political possibilities in prison is useful. The applicability question is really the big question in my mind. And the questions that I'm asking when I was reading it is, I mean, just the mention of civil society in the 1970s in Brazil, it's like, that's doing a lot of work, right? That's not really telling me,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
how is this possible, right? Like, I think the Attica comparison is incredibly useful, right? Because if we see these two moments of crises, what happens in Brazil is what happens in Brazil outside of this program, but also this program. Whereas what happens in the United States is really just the beginning of mass incarceration on a completely punitive, militarized model, right? So Attica doesn't provide that political space that happened in Brazil. And so why? Right? That's like part of the question for me of understanding. And part of that, I think, has to do with the maturity of the administrative state, right? The kind of the fiefdoms of power and really the diminution of civil society in particular. Contra Brazil, maybe I'm not an expert on Brazilian history, right? So that's kind of the question that's really that I'm having. And yeah, so I don't know if that.
Yeah, like when do we get the military dictatorship in Brazil?
Yeah.
When is that?
So
So what's happening in the 70s is what's happening in the broader like social movement, political.
the 70s was very interesting. This is like one of the interesting things that I was thinking about. But in the 70s, there are like the same time during the dictatorship, many people get in prison, many militant. And then you see, like, for example, in the 70s, in the same time, they burned the Red Army, they create the Red Army, like in Rio de Janeiro, for example, then exactly the people in prison, they organize themselves, responding to the violence of the staff, seeing how the political prison was there organizing, and they still there. The Red Army is the one that they was fighting exactly in the last week. They are like very organized, but in the start there was like some organizations for self-defense of the people in prison. They was doing like bank assault mainly. Then they started on the traffic of drugs, and then the like man division and so on. And it's a very interesting period of time inside the prison. And then it's also interesting time to things like the reform and the relation inside the left, because then finally Lula, who was one of the most radical trade unionists to get in prison and so on, it was very clearly class analysis of this part in this moment. And there was like the struggling and against dictatorship, they get in jail, they get died. And this was then it was like very like it was like highly motivated, very class conscious people that was doing it. But then when they come to the government, they still nowadays and the time that I was there, they have like still some fear of like reforming police and touching the police, touching the military force, touching the prison system, because it's like something like a bomb that will explode. And they have like finally, they have do a lot of reform. They have like put a lot of money like on poverty reduction. The Brazil is going out from the hunger, like yes, and they have like getting improvement. Still, there are big favela. and like very harsh division, the people inside. Then it's like, I think that some of the questions that we have in the penal system are questions that are more like broadly democracy and society that we live in, and the capacity of like radical transformation. But this is the history when the same the people was like fighting inside. It was like theology of liberation was very strong and repressed in this time, and they have like some influence on these in the upward transformation of the penal system. And then it's an absolutely long story, but still nowadays, and it's changed. It's changed the people that it was there, but it's not to change also the people, but it's changed the crime. The crime is very different in the 70s from the nowadays in the drug trafficking, for example, it's huge and massive. Then yeah, I think that there are like all these things are very connected, but it's in a connection of what we do like as a society. If you want like a more radical transformation, it was in the start of the Lula government, and then more and more it's like don't get through.
Are there narratives from the early founders and proponents of this about their early motivations?
No, was it. No, there are narrative, but the narrative are this is like it's interesting because they switch like the first founder, it was different from like the president, the other election. There are inside the movement, there are like contradiction, and there are like evangelic people, there are like spiritual people, like spiritist people, candomblé people. There's like very different people, religions, atheists also. But they was trying to converge together for like transforming the penal system. But some of the people are like are in theology of liberation. They get the idea of like transformation radically, the prison system. Some other people that bring a lot of voluntary people in mass, they're like not in this. They're like with theology of prosperity. There are clash inside, you know, like as the movement is a big clash because some people. Exactly, the theology of prosperity in Brazil is like the one that they have taken in very few times, 30 years, they take 30% of the population that was Catholic historically. And they basically propagate that you have to, as individual, you have to get through and get, you know, if you want to become rich, you can, but you know, then it's very like individualistic and capitalistic ethic, and then it's very far away from the collective project.
Let's see if we get two more questions in the. Anyone who hasn't asked one yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in a couple of things. So one, do you see any evidence of people building kind of a political identity, or folks who have spent time within these? It's interesting because you call them prisons. What they popularly refer to them still as prisons, even though they're alternative facilities.
Yeah.
But see people building political identity outside of that context. And talked a little bit about some of the limitations to that material side, but I'm wondering, it seems like a lot of people over a lot of spaces that could be participating in such a movement. Do you see research being done by prisoners? It seems like research, based on what you're saying, is pretty embedded into that model, like creating space for research in prison itself.
Participatory action research. Yeah, I had written that down too as a question.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. What I see is with something more like in other things that is more something that is more radical to participatory research. It's the people that they do the university, they start to study some like they become PhD, become professor. It's not like big work as a people that participate in other people research or like collective research, but they become professors. You know, like they're like there was some people, it's still not a huge number, I would say, because the university system is closed. It's very close in Brazil. It's competitive. It's crazy, but the public university is free. But at the same time, there are like few places, and then you have to have like very high note for getting through, and then it's hard that people get it. Still, they get many people to the university and so on. It will be interesting, like analysis to see like how many people are doing this, but I was absolutely. I remember that there was the people with they have like a Foucault working group that was reading like. Book that is not like the common of like of the space and then
But they're not producing research. They have study groups and education, but are
there are
they?
some people that have they get master and they start to do research about, and also like the they are doing this, but I will not say that it's massive. Because the university, this is not like, and this is like, the penal system is not alone, like it depends on the collaboration of the other, and if the people have not the possibility to get trained and so on, it's hard. But yeah, but sure they participate in some extent in the building of the movement and they lead. So like they do like they speak about what their experience and what they are doing. This is still is interesting because it's not necessary. There are some sort of like central control in the people that have built the movement and the methodology. Then it's not necessary. This is one of my questions was like in which extent, and it is still open, in which extent the people that are there, they are like leading the movement formally, they can effectively like change part of the movement. Yeah, this is like open question.
In Wilmington, Delaware, the whole like anti-violence movement was sort of brought together with participatory action research, which was conducted by Yasser Payne in sociology at the University of Delaware, who got his training here at the Graduate Center with Michelle Fine.
Yeah, it just, to actually just look back to actually what you said, Alex, I think, about, the danger of relying on the institution to solve social problems and importance of putting it in that wider context. And also, I think related to, that notion of specificity, what you were saying about the violence interrupter project, why does something work in one context and not in another context? Why does it work in one historical moment and not in another historical moment? I mean, for example, if we take New York City, I mean, it's a history of reform and failures of reform. If you take Rikers, well, that could have been Rikers in the 1930s. You had Austin McCormack and Richard McGee, two pioneers in terms of prison education. That's what they were doing in Rikers. They had gardens, they had a baseball team. It was all about re-entry, and then of course it all went wrong. Then there were other pockets of optimism, like in the 50s with Anna Cross, and then all that went wrong. So I think that's sort of, it's interesting why things work and why they kind of just go as well. And obviously a lot of that's political will.
Yeah, I think that this is like is also not only here, it's like Foucault or like framework that the reform of the time in some extent they feel. But also in some extent they produce something. It's not like totally failed. It's generally failed, but some people get through, some people can change. What I find interesting is like in some extent the reform in the society also do the same. Then there are like some people like the Lula government, the DPT, trying to reform radically the society, but they get stuck. We have a lot of discussion about the capital from the capitalist society and that thing, like the reaction put in place in the prison, but also in the economic sector because many of the reform economic. And then I think that overall what I will think on like Paulo Freire, Gramsci, and Marx, and so on, I will say that the difference on the different experience that it depends on the popular fronts that you can create, like the part of the society that you try to build and put together for be that coalition that can support the transformation that is very important. In this case, in Brazil, they find like the evangelical and the Catholic community that was in some extent hearing about the people in prison, and also is interested not necessarily inside the left party, was one of the people was inside the working party. Like, not all the people inside the left they care about the human rights of people. Then they have built some weird coalition sometimes. It was the same with Basaglia. The Communist Party was a big part of the Communist Party was again the closure of the asylum system. No, to some extent because some people will say like a social order problem. They don't want to accommodate working class people, basic people, like people with mental health problems. And then there was against, and they built like some weird coalition. So in this case, with some like some Demo-Christian centrist people, and like some people of the Communist Party, and they can pass the law for like abolish the asylum system. They have like a historically big, evident problem, very similar to the prison. the people put inside for
Yeah.
whaling.
Well,
and
obviously we had that here too.
yeah, and then
Yeah, I'm not in the field, coming from like science psychology, so I kind of read the paper from that perspective. And it was, I really enjoyed it. It seemed to be descriptive rather than analytical to me. And I think your comment about not having a really clearly articulated analytical framework to work from was part of that. It also made me want more detail, which maybe the book does.
Yeah.
Maybe this is really almost just like a blurb, you know, as an advertisement for the book. Because there were a whole number of different sort of specific questions I had that would actually, I think, provide more insight. For example, like who is assigned to these prisons? Is there some kind of selectivity there? You alluded today to people being sort of breaking the system, the honor rules, and then being sent out. Like internally, what mechanisms of punishment, control, social pressure come into play? You know, in those units. I was also really curious about how this group of people, individuals, whatever, were like given the responsibility for creating this institution, even though it was maybe inside of a shell. Was that like almost a squatting kind of tactic of like, we're gonna do this? You know, but you can't really do it because like what happened to the prisoners when this place burned down? That's also an interesting question for me, because, you know, it's one thing to go into an existing system without really disrupting the power structure and the people in charge and say, oh, well, let's try and do this and let's bring education into that. And it's another thing to say, well, we're going to start our own institution here. And how is that even allowed?
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's like, thank you for the question. Yeah, it's like the book is 400 pages and they have like 5,000 pages of ethnographic. It's like a ethnographic reflection. I spent like 5 weeks, like 24 hours inside the unit, like speaking with all the people and then reflecting around the world in the like 3 years, more than 3 years. Right? Then I read like a huge amount of thesis and work on the APAC system, critical analysis, and so on. That it's a long question, but and this is like exactly like a short chapter. And the people have asked me to like to this global community alternative, and this was crazy to reducing. Then I've taken a lot of things out because I wanted to into the point of the history. It was like interesting for rethinking. Like if there was like I want to show in some extent that other countries have probation in some extent. I have alternative to prison that don't call probation. They can be like more radical than what we call probation. Then I want to say work a little bit on the colonial framework, and this was one of the objectives of this paper, like trying to take some of the reflection in the big like research. And the people that are going there is interesting. Are the people that they asked to go in these kinds of unity. I was supposed in the start that there was people with petty crime and like as many alternative. It was not like and some of the people of the judicial system was sending the people with heavy crime with long time because they was thinking that they had more time to rehabilitate them. So then many of the people was with homicide, like serial rape. I do like interview with one was 20 rape in the street, and they're like people that was like with tough crimes, not the. But overall, one analysis, one person had do an analysis of like comparing the crime in the APAC system, in the prison system, they show that they are more or less the similar from the old system when they have to do this kind of analysis. Then there are not necessarily a selection of the crime, but the selection is not in the start, but is in ongoing. Because as I say, like if the people commit violence, they drop out. If the people are like using drugs, they can drop out and so on. If they don't comply with the rule, don't engage in the system and so on, they can drop out. Then there are some sort of selection.
What they're not dropping out, they're getting forced out.
Yeah, yeah.
I would just say, right, they're not like, oh, my bad, I'm not coming anymore.
No,
No,
also-
they're forced
There are
out.
forced out. It's interesting. There are some people, when I was doing the interview that was dropping out, there's some people say to me, I don't want to work. I'm like, I prefer like, it's like, because they were,
Okay,
like,
maybe.
they are like, but yes, they are dropping, they are pushing out.
Yeah.
But also this is interesting that the people can reapply and being readmitted. They use like interesting like pedagogic approach and then say that the people can do error and then like okay, you're violent, you go out and then you can reapply and come back and we restart the process and
You apply from the main prison.
from the prison. Yeah, and this was one of the problems because like yeah, no, it was the other point that I respond to.
Yeah, and how
Yeah.
does that happen? That's probably that's
Sorry.
how many.
So how do they get the initial permission from the prison system to
Okay.
take prisoners out of the main prison and into
Yeah.
these programs?
Yeah, there was like a riot, big riot destroyed like a big prison in the city. And I think that they moved some people outside, but they have not space for all. And then there was like some section, they start as a section inside the prison when the people have like good relation. We see this in many programs. For example, in the University of Buenos Aires in prison, they have like a section that basically is not the correctional officer allowed to enter because the university professor and the student, they go through well and they don't need like external. And it was some similar on this. They like these kinds of building inside, they put off and work, and still work. And then like the relation there was and then they create, but sure, it's a long history and when the government was changed, they shut down some unity, but some other people have learned how to create this kind of unity and that they take off in the other side of Brazil. And then they should, and it is still like this kind of ongoing, sometimes like conservative government try to shut down and the people put a lot of effort in training the other people how to rebuild. And then they rebuild, like, and they spread.
Is the system totally federalized or?
No, it's like the state
That's
that
right.
give this them. Yes, it's like the big concentration is in Minas Gerais, and they will start in São Paulo. Then they move. That is like it's interesting because it's still like Minas Gerais is like very huge now. There are people incarcerated, and this is like it's a problem. The system, the APAC system grow, but this not necessarily stop the mass incarceration that still follow like their direction as many alternatives that we see. Then in which extent the political capacity finally of the reentry program of the university in prison or like all this like program that the people do have to be like evaluated and this will be hard also like to understand in the long term how you can build like a transformative coalition. Yeah.
We need to have our radical plans in place when a moment of crisis makes the impossible possible. If we haven't, if the plan isn't already ready, then you can't take advantage of the crisis.
Yeah.
You know, these are not incremental opportunities.
Right.
These are radical ruptures that we have to be ready to take advantage of.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, to add to that, so like, in addition to my background as a sociologist, my PhD is in sociology, I have a training in GIS, right, geographical information systems and mapping.
Mm.
So the first thing that came to mind is that has anybody just sort of laid out visually the APAC system in Brazil and like what states it's present in and sort of visualizing the prison population in different states in Brazil, and the APAC as sort of an alternative. And sort of where those populations might be coming from. I mean, I know the data might be, not the most comprehensive, but if that's something that your partners, who are there are interested in like building out, because the numbers that you presented and then sort of one of the later slides, it's a large population that's being served. That is not a small number. Like we're not talking about like, one pilot in one facility with like, a dozen folks. We're talking about thousands.
Yeah.
And, to the point of like, you know, the empirical analysis, and it doesn't just have to be like, you know, quantitative. I'm thinking qualitative too, and visually, and understanding what states are people coming from, what are their age ranges, you know, what might they have been convicted for, you know, learning and maybe surveying or interviewing and talking to and learning from those who are the participants and also the practitioners may be really beneficial in learning. And then, you know, whether replicating or thinking about funding or designing similar models, you know, because in the US, you know, how much do we know, right, in terms of alternatives? And I mean, to be honest, like what came to mind for me when we were talking about community, you know, that's really where my mind is at, you know, doing place-based studies. And to me, it's like for those young people who are at crossroads and horizons, like to reduce that population would mean probably more of a reliance on essentially like group homes, or I don't know what the full term is, but basically, you know, and they have some programs like this, but I think they're sort of not all the way sustained. So some facilities will exist and then they're no longer functioning. But essentially more of a home-based environment where it's sort of this idea of you have a key, you can come and go as you please, you know, radical idea. You are more of in a home environment. You're not completely integrated into society yet, but you're not in a secure facility. And that's where so much of I could see potentially, I'm just brainstorming, you know, this type of program and this type of model, which is to me like so essential. Because when I'm there teaching college courses, it's just like this is not enough, you know, because they're still going back to halls where there's vermin and they're not, you know, et cetera, right? You know, they're not getting proper nutrition and they don't have mental, you know, the types of social environment that I think you're illustrating so well. So I guess I would just put that out there as like, what new or sort of creative ways might we think of to sort of understand the landscape of this particular program in Brazil, where it seems like it's been pretty widespread, and you've actually explained even how it's present in other countries as well, right? I mean, some of the information materials, I know enough Portuguese and Spanish to know that some of that was in Spanish, it wasn't Portuguese. So, you know, there must have been a country outside of Brazil that you were looking at as well.
They have like created like they have also like the inner center of research, and they want to spread the model. They like put a lot of effort. They have like other stuff that do on the internationalization. They do like link with other people and try. I would say that they are very passionate and militant on this kind of like spreading that I don't see a lot on like people that work in correctional facility like that. You know, it's like I remember in one conference someone say, why you have not studied the probation in UK? It's like I have not seen like a lot of people understand this. It was to be an managerialism, right? Yeah, but it was not passionate. You know, the people was like, okay, do this job, but it's not like these people are very passionate. They like and the people in Greenville is passionate. They try to push like
evangelical.
They're evangelical. Some people are like some people are like only focusing on the right of the people in prison.
I mean, what you just described is really interesting. We do have this country is rehab, and it's very much many like functioning rehabs operate on exactly this model, where even staffed by attendees, right? Where you have, you know, but there is often an evangelicalism, whether explicitly religious or not, that goes along with that. So, but there's a striking similarity, I think.
I'm so sorry.
What are you apologizing?
No,
it's like this.
But you know, as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking about the economic role of prisons, right? And the way in which fundamentally what they seem to do, at least in the United States, is reduce the cost of labor by creating a whole realm of things that are produced within the prison, and also depressing the wages that people are eligible for once they've been incarcerated, and thus, you know, a lower tide reaches all boats, right? And, you know, and I'm thinking about how, you know, the date range for the Brazilian dictatorship is roughly like the mid-60s to the mid-80s. And they also have something of an economic boom while this is going. And, you know, so that the cynical part of me is wondering about this emphasis on work. I mean, obviously, we're all educators, so we all want to get in there and we want to, you know, have them read Shakespeare or something. Right, I mean, of course, but, well, I would teach Shakespeare. But in any case, but what I'm thinking about is the fact that, the ennobling character of work that becomes this sort of, narrative is one piece of how these prisons can function economically. And then the other thing that I've become really aware of since I've been chairing this committee is that there's a whole economy of rehab, right? You know, individuals who've been in prison and have become, you know, they come out and they become social workers and they, you know, they help others who are getting past addictions and so on. So that it becomes this, there's a re-entry economy, and there's nothing wrong with that in a way. It's a better way to wind up than some other ways you might wind up. But at the same time, there's almost a kind of a cynicism about it, right? Because it becomes an economic cycle. So I'm wondering if that's part of this, as groovy as it sounds.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's complicated. First of all, I will say that the idea that like the prison will like lower the price of work is can be tricky and complicated. In particular, in Brazil, I'm sure that is complicated because the people in Rio de Janeiro will work without wage, or like they work on whatever, like the employment is very high, and also like for contemporary working forces, like the prison population is very hard to put work with that contemporary job. Then like most of the people was not working in the prison in Brazil. Less than 10% of the people work, and on the 10% of the people that work, it's like very few that work outside, and most of the things are like so managing the prison, like clean. Then it's like I don't think that they compete with like the
But they're saving money, they're saving.
yeah, they're saving money from the prison system. Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
This
and
sure.
there's that.
This sure, like yeah. It's also like yeah. And the other side, sorry, the other question.
No, it was one question. Yes, about, you know, this kind of the economic, holistic, the ways in which society winds up being kind of a vital city.
Yeah, and the other things is connected also on what we do, like education in prison, general university in prison. Many programs are connected with the idea that the people get job. Yeah, and like in and in some extent I see this clash between the theology of liberation, the theology of prosperity in the periphery and inside the prison. The theology of liberation was fundamentally with the bet that we can change the society, you know. But then finally they get stuck, and then they don't transform, they don't give job or housing for everyone, and so on. Then finally, the most of the job in the market are not absolutely good, and the people in prison normally take the lower job in the market. And in some extent, it's not good, but what will happen if the people don't have a job? They might come back, because and then they will cycle back. Another time, if they're like society that forced to change radical the situation, it will be good. I think that the things that they are doing is good, like giving the job and trying to put critical consciousness and overall an organization that space for creating discussion and like a movement about the people in prison, with the people in prison in the front. Still like this contradiction, like as I say, like there was people calling that this is like giving job. Also, they say this about the university in prison. You know, like in French, I was reading about like one of the movement of prison education in French that they explode because some people say you are collaborationist with the prison system. They don't want to collaborate anymore because they say like we save some people and then most of the prison system still there, and then it's like a big discussion. Then I think that overall is if we don't put the penal system inside the social system, it will be even very hard to ask for like radical transformation of the penal system because it's so hard to get done to like a public health system, like, you know, like our society as a whole when the people are involved directly. And I think that we have like some good experience in the campaign that was in New York when the people like frame on like topics that at the same time reduce crime, but at the same time improve the life of the people. Housing, like childcare. And I think that this can be a coalition that more broad that only focus on the people in prison and do punctual like work. Yes. Because I see that here, for example, some people are very upset that the people in prison study at Columbia University and other people have to pay 90,000. You know, it's like I see that I can see in the political debate if they become massive these kinds of what can be the relation of the people. You know?
I mean, I like your question, right, because it you know, begs like an analytic framework a little bit, right? Do we understand the prison from a Marxist perspective, that it's an expression of the dominant means of exploitation in the society? You know, our colleague Ruthie Gilmore says we should not understand the US prison as a system of labor exploitation. It's a system of warehousing surplus labor. So yes, it's still an expression of managing a crisis within systems of accumulation, but it changes depending on the circumstances. So right now, we have these surplus populations and surplus capital that was looking for investments, and prisons were a way to manage those surpluses. And she also says surplus land in places like in rural California. Well, I think it's 8:30.
Yeah.
So, thanks everybody.
We can move to the bar. So.
It's got its priorities.
Yeah. The order.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for being there.